Hello students, olfaction is the sense of smell. This is a type of chemoreception. Odorants are small molecules that are volatile. In other words, they evaporate pretty easily and they're dissolved in the air. And as you breathe them in, they go up inside of your nasal passageway and land on mucus, are dissolved, and then are picked up by chemoreceptors. Now this is pretty nifty. This allows us to pick up information about food or people or danger in the environment. You all know what gas smells like. You smell gas, you know that there could be a gas leak and there might be danger. Or smoke when you're not expecting a fire. So olfaction is a really wonderful way that we can perceive the universe around us. Everything from danger to ripe fruit or vegetables to loved ones. The olfactory epithelium is the sensory receptor organ in this case, and it's in the superior part of the nasal cavity. There's three kinds of cells. The olfactory receptors actually detect the odors. There are supporting cells that sustain the olfactory receptors, and then there's basal cells that will replace the olfactory receptors every 40 to 60 days. So here we've got a little coffee mug. We're inhaling some coffee fumes, and those little molecules, those odorants, are flying up into the nasal cavity and then landing in the mucus layer here that we can see. And that's going to let them be dissolved. It's important that the mucus layer is there for those molecules to dissolve, otherwise they're not going to properly diffuse and fit into the sensory receptor endings. We've got these little tiny olfactory hairs here that are going to fit into a type of modified bipolar cell. Those olfactory nerves then go up through the cribriform plate of the ethmoid and connect to neurons inside of the olfactory bulb. The olfactory receptor cells are the primary neurons that are responsible for actually smelling molecules. They're modified bipolar cells, and they have little cilia, little modified olfactory hairs, that project out from the dendrite and into the mucus. These little olfactory hairs contain specific chemical receptors for different odorants. The olfactory nerve, cranial nerve number 1, is the bundle of olfactory cell axons, and these go up through the cribriform plate of the ethmoid and go into the olfactory bulb. The olfactory bulb is going to be basically just a connection for cranial nerve 1 there to go back into the brain. The olfactory tracts, of course, are going to be the bundle of axons as they enter the brain and are now part of the central nervous system. An interesting thing about these olfactory tracts is that they're going to bypass the thalamus. They don't project into it. And that's really unusual. All of our other sensations do go into the thalamus. It's like a big sensory switching station. But olfaction bypasses that and goes directly to the primary olfactory cortex, which is in the temporal lobe. This will then send radiations into the hypothalamus, the amygdala, and other regions. Because of that, smell can be a very strong evocator of emotion and memory. You recall the movie Ratatouille, where the critic took a bite of ratatouille and was instantly transported back in time. That's because the olfaction and gustation are really, really prominent in memory. To smell something, we need to sniff repeatedly or breathe deeply. The mucus is going to contain odorant binding proteins, and these are going to help us to magnify the signal. That signal is going to trigger depolarization of a neuron and lead to an action potential that's going to go to a secondary neuron. That secondary neuron then will conduct signals into the central nervous system so that we can perceive or identify and possibly have an emotional reaction to the smell. Moving on to taste, gustation is the sense of taste, and just like smell, we're going to detect small molecules. These are also dissolved, in this case in saliva, and we're going to call them tastants. The gustatory cells are the chemoreceptors within our taste buds. So our taste bud is a larger complex of cells. It's kind of an onion-shaped organ housing taste receptors, and they only live for 7 to 9 days. The gustatory cells turn over fairly quickly. There are supporting cells, just like we had with the olfactory system, and basal cells, just like we had with the olfactory system. Here's one of the valate papilla. This is one of the larger structures on the tongue, and embedded all around kind of the sides here, we're going to find these little tiny taste buds. So this is kind of a big circular canyon, if you will, that's going all around this papilla. And if we zoom in even more, here's a taste bud. You can see that there's these gustatory cells, and there's a little taste pore and microvilli. Those microvilli are actually the dendritic endings of the gustatory cells, and they're going to extend through the taste pore all the way to the surface of the tongue. As those little tastants, or tasty molecules, dissolve in saliva, they're going to then disperse around, diffuse, and eventually lock into receptors. The interesting thing is, and you're welcome to try this at home, is that if you're not dissolving your tastants in saliva, you can't actually taste anything. That saliva has to dissolve it so that those molecules have a chance to diffuse. Without diffusion, they're never going to go anywhere. So take a paper towel and dry your tongue. Stick your tongue out, keep it out, pat it dry, let it air dry for a minute or so, and then have someone, hopefully someone you trust, put a little bit of salt or sugar on your tongue. You will not be able to taste it. If you pull your tongue into your mouth, get it a little bit wet, then you'll be able to start tasting the salt or the sugar. There's multiple gustatory pathways. The anterior part of the tongue, the sensory neurons are part of the facial or cranial nerve number 7, and in the posterior 2/3 of the tongue, it's going to be the glossopharyngeal or cranial nerve number 9. Secondary neurons from both 7 and 9 are then going to project into the thalamus. There are 5 basic taste sensations: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. Sweet is produced by organic compounds like sugar or artificial sweeteners. Salt is detection of metallic ions such as sodium or potassium. Sour is associated with acids, for example, vinegar. Bitter is associated with alkaloids like unsweetened chocolate. And umami is a taste related to the amino acids glutamate and aspartate that will produce kind of a meaty flavor. The sensation of taste is a combination of several of these broad taste modalities, in combination with changes in temperature and texture, especially olfaction. That's going to give us our ultimate sensation of taste. Olfaction actually accounts for approximately 80% of taste. If you've ever lost your sense of smell, you know what I'm talking about.